Minister of Advanced Education, Skills and Training.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It is always my honour to stand in these chambers and to take my seat as the member for Vancouver Mount Pleasant. I'm also very proud to be Niska and Gitxsan and Cree and Ojibwe. And I wear my grandmother's necklace with pride from the Niska Nation. So it is my honour to stand here in these chambers to support Bill 26 and the Gaming Revenue Sharing Act. I appreciate many of the remarks that have been delivered in these chambers. I guess I just want to start with what a historic time we are at. It is 2019. Former politicians, former elected officials went to great lengths to wipe out my relatives, and we survived. And not only have we survived, but Indigenous people are the fastest growing population in this country. And we know the statistics of Indigenous people with respect to over-incarceration in jails and over-representation in the foster care system and poverty and missing women. And that is a narrative that we need to stand up and reject, Honourable Speaker. We have to reject, as the Minister for Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation says, we have to disrupt the status quo. And I believe our government is doing just that. Reconciliation without action is meaningless. This is a negotiation. What we are talking about, the changes that are going to happen that I referred to as being historic, have been called upon by First Nations since 2007 for some First Nations. First Nations have been asking for gaming revenue sharing to be negotiated by the province for years. In 2007, First Nations leaders presented to the previous government the BC First Nations Investment Plan. The plan recommended 3%. Our government's taking things a little bit further, 7%. And I've heard all sorts of remarks in these chambers, Honourable Speaker, from members opposite, why 7%, why this or that. The bottom line is, we have a lot of work to do to turn things around when it comes to our relationships with Indigenous people. The true stewards of this land, the caretakers of the land that many of us are proud to acknowledge when it comes to an opening of an event or what have you. But real reconciliation means making choices. And our government believes that this was the right choice. Members opposite can talk about all the choices that they made, but for 16 years, they didn't make this choice. This was an easy choice for us. And I want to share with you what this means to Judith Sayers. We've been waiting a long time for this, says the president of the New Channel Nation. I personally have been involved in trying to get this going for 13 years, and it's been at least 30 years that First Nations have been doing it, so it's a good day. I can spend time talking about the mechanics of this legislation. Bottom line, it will create a reliable, long-term revenue stream for First Nations as part of our commitment to reconciliation. The stable, predictable source of income to fund economic, social, and cultural activities. The use of the gaming revenue to support their own priorities. This is self-determination, Madam Speaker. It will enhance social services, education, infrastructure, cultural revitalization, and self-government capacity. But I want to pause for a moment because I think it's important for those that are going to look back at the historic time that we're in. I'm the first First Nations woman to ever get elected to stand in these chambers, and that only happened in 2016. So the fight has been... Thank you. I will always thank you for acknowledging the resilience of my relatives to survive and their goal to have thriving communities. And that drive is for self-determination. So it does bug me, it irks me, it hurts me when people stand in these chambers with such pride to represent their communities, and to bring fear into these chambers as though those dumb Indians aren't going to be able to manage their affairs. Those days are over. We need to stop talking about Indigenous people like they're some dumb Indians. That paternalistic approach is the way of the past. And what my generation is calling for and what my ancestors have been calling for is change. We want prosperity in our communities. So I want to quote some of the fear-mongering, because I think people at home need to understand. When you look at an MLA, we should all stand with pride that we represent all of our constituents equally. This act is about sharing revenue, sharing gaming revenue. A long-term commitment for 25 years, embedded into legislation. But we had some members opposite, former cabinet ministers, to add to that, saying that this is about paying off friends. Seems to me more like about paying off friends than it's actually about getting resources to the bands. Let's quote another one. The challenge that the nations have faced can be summed up quite nicely in a book that Calvin Helene wrote called Dances with Dependencies. It's a very interesting book. It's not about, drug or alcohol addiction. It's about addiction to government checks, money that's coming in from governments. I wonder if this is an attempt in terms of the gaming revenues in this process. Is this not just another government check coming? Shame. Shame on the member opposite for saying such an ignorant thing. Shame on going around and acting like, ho, ho, we're all in this together and we respect our First Nations. Say that to the chiefs. Go out and tell the chiefs that you think that we're standing there with our hand out. We were, and we had thriving conditions as Indigenous people. The only reason why we are talking about reconciliation is because elected officials of the past took deliberate and calculated measures to take our communities apart. And the fact that we're standing, I am so proud. I'm so proud that my families across this province have fought for our land. And we are fighting for a share. That is what this is about. This is about a share in resources, and it is about a share in saying that our government, our BC-NDP government, are going to do things differently. I know I don't have a lot of time because my colleagues are very passionate about having the opportunity to talk about turning things around. That is reconciliation in action. It's a historic moment, and it's one that when I think of the list of Indigenous people bringing programs into their communities on health and wellness, infrastructure, economic, business, development, education, language, these are going to be game changers. The gaming revenue sharing is going to be game changing, Madam Speaker, for First Nations people across this province, and I'm so proud to be standing in the chambers to be able to take that action, to make it happen. I want to acknowledge one of the members opposite's comments who referred to visits as a cabinet minister to the significantly shoddy conditions these people live in. We cannot turn our eyes. We cannot be blind to the issues. Right now in a federal election, we are talking about Indigenous people across this country that don't have clean drinking water. Shame. Shame on the people that ignored those issues. Shame on the people that have ignored, didn't have the guts to stand up and do the right thing for First Nations people. This isn't about my bias as a First Nations person. It's not because it's my relatives that might have better conditions than those shoddy conditions that the member opposite referred to. Our job as elected officials to be in government is to make our communities stronger and brighter, and this gaming revenue is going to do just that. Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to share a few words. Tuksiyazam.